When the storm finally fell silent, the people of Frostfang believed the mountain had claimed another forgotten life. An Omega mother had vanished into the endless snow with 8 newborn pups cradled against her chest. She had no fire, no shelter, no food. The wind alone was enough to steal a grown wolf's final breath before sunrise. Yet 3 days later, the rival king climbed into that frozen wilderness expecting to bury the dead, and instead found 9 sleeping children. No fire had ever burned there. No footprints surrounded the shelter. The snow itself seemed to have guarded them, and beside the smallest infant, ancient symbols glowed beneath the ice, symbols no living wolf had seen for nearly 1,000 years. From that single impossible morning, 2 kingdoms began walking toward a destiny neither of them could escape. Winter always arrived early in the Frostfang Mountains. Long before the valleys below surrendered their last golden leaves, the highest cliffs disappeared beneath blankets of white so deep that entire forests seemed to sink beneath the season. Rivers froze into silent roads of blue crystal. Pine trees bowed beneath layers of heavy snow until their branches almost kissed the frozen earth. Even the wolves spoke more softly during those months, as though afraid the mountains themselves might awaken. The people believed winter possessed ears. They believed the mountain remembered every promise and every betrayal. Among those towering peaks stood the kingdom of Frostfang, a land where strength decided nearly everything. The strongest hunted, the strongest ruled, the strongest inherited names remembered for generations. The weakest were expected to survive without asking for kindness. And, among the weakest, stood the Omegas. They lived quietly at the edge of villages, tending herbs, caring for the sick, delivering children, preparing food, mending clothes, and burying the dead. Most alphas barely noticed they existed unless something needed fixing. Yet whenever sickness swept through the valleys, whenever children cried through fever, whenever wounded hunters staggered home bleeding, it was always an Omega who answered the door first. Among them all, no one carried a kinder heart than Alara. She never hurried her work. Even while gathering herbs before dawn, she stopped to untangle frightened birds trapped in thorn bushes. She carried food to elderly widows before feeding herself. She remembered every child's favorite flower, every shepherd's aching joints, every mother's quiet worries. People often wondered how someone with so little could continue giving so much. Even wolves noticed. Wild foxes no longer fled when she crossed the woods. Ravens followed her during autumn harvests. Old deer sometimes stood motionless beside forest paths until she passed, watching with calm black eyes before disappearing into the trees. Some whispered that nature itself trusted her. Others laughed at such foolish stories. Alara never cared which they believed. Kindness, she often said, did not become less valuable simply because nobody thanked it. Those words had belonged to her mate before the war carried him away. Kalen. Even now his name lingered inside their tiny cottage like the last warmth from an extinguished fire. He had left during the border conflict nearly a year earlier, promising he would return before winter. Every evening afterward, Alara lit a small lantern beside the window, not because she believed its light reached the battlefield, but because hope deserved somewhere to live. The lantern still burned. Kalen never came home. No body returned. No farewell arrived. Only silence. In Frostfang, silence often meant death. Still, Alara refused to stop believing completely. Some mornings she caught herself placing an extra wooden bowl beside the table before quietly putting it away again. Other mornings she found herself smiling toward the doorway after hearing footsteps outside, only to remember. Always remember. Life, however, did not wait for grief. As autumn surrendered to winter, another miracle quietly grew beneath her heart. She was carrying Kalen's children. Not one child. Not two. When the village healer finally examined her beneath the glow of oil lamps, the elderly woman's weathered hands began trembling. "I have never felt heartbeats like these," she whispered. Months later, the truth astonished everyone. 8 newborn pups entered the world before dawn beneath the sound of falling snow. 8 tiny lives. 8 soft cries. 8 impossibly fragile children wrapped inside worn blankets stitched from old wool. The little cottage became filled with warmth despite the bitter cold outside. Neighbors brought fresh bread, simple wooden toys, goat's milk, bundles of dried herbs. For a brief moment, even hardship stepped quietly around that tiny home. Yet happiness seldom escaped the eyes of powerful men. High above the village stood Frostfang Keep, carved directly into black mountain stone. Its towers overlooked every valley, every road, every roof. From those windows ruled King Darius.
Tall, proud, feared.
A wolf whose victories had built his crown long before mercy ever reached his heart. He believed kingdoms survived because rulers crushed danger before danger learned to breathe. Nothing frightened him more than prophecy, especially one nearly forgotten. Long before Darius had been born, ancient seers recorded a warning beneath the Temple of Winter. When 9 hearts beat beneath one mother's sacrifice, the frozen crown shall kneel before compassion. Most scholars dismissed the old writings, legends, fairy tales, children's stories. But Darius never ignored old fears, especially after hearing impossible rumors surrounding Alera's birth. She carried an ancient bloodline connected to forgotten guardians of the mountain.
Now,
she had delivered 8 children. His advisors assured him there were only 8, yet the prophecy refused to leave his thoughts. Night after night, he walked alone through echoing castle halls until finally one sleepless evening he summoned Captain Voren. The aging commander entered without question. His armor still carried fresh scratches from recent patrols. "You sent for me, my king." Darius stared out the frost-covered window. The Omega. Voren lowered his eyes. "Alera. She and her pups leave before sunrise." The captain remained silent. "They have committed no crime. They exist." Silence answered again. "I will not spill innocent blood inside my kingdom," Darius continued coldly. "Take them beyond the northern pass. The blizzard. The mountain will decide the rest." Voren's jaw tightened. He had followed Darius through 2 wars. He had never questioned an order. Until now. "They are infants. They are a threat. They cannot even open their eyes." Darius slowly turned. "The moment you begin measuring danger by size instead of destiny, kingdoms fall." The king stepped closer. "Do it before dawn." Captain Voren bowed. Not because he agreed, because refusing meant another captain would gladly obey. Outside, snow continued falling. Before sunrise, 6 mounted guards arrived quietly outside Alera's cottage. No villagers were awake. No witness saw the tears gathering beneath Captain Voren's eyes as he knocked. Alera opened the door carrying one sleeping pup against her shoulder. The sight of armored soldiers needed no explanation. Her face turned pale. She looked from one silent guard to another. Finally, to the captain. "What has happened?" His voice barely escaped above a whisper. "The king has issued an exile." She blinked. "There must be some mistake." "There is none. My children were born yesterday. I know. I have nowhere else to go. I know. They'll die." His eyes closed. "I know." For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Only the wind answered. Alera lowered her gaze toward the tiny faces sleeping peacefully against her chest. None understood that the world had already judged them guilty simply for existing. She did not scream. She did not beg. Instead, she wrapped each child more carefully, folded their blankets tighter, placed dried herbs inside a small leather pouch, picked up Kalen's old cloak, then reached for the lantern that had waited so many months beside the window. Its flame flickered softly. She watched it a long time before gently blowing it out. Perhaps hope, she thought, would have to travel with her now. Hours later, the small procession climbed into the northern mountains. The storm worsened with every step. Wind screamed through narrow cliffs. Snow buried the road almost as quickly as horses uncovered it. By afternoon, they reached the border ridge. Beyond it stretched wilderness untouched by villages or roads. Captain Voren finally pulled his horse to a stop. No words felt worthy. He climbed down carrying one small bundle of dried meat from his saddle. It was hardly enough for himself. Quietly, he placed it inside Alara's basket, then removed his heavy fur gloves. They'll help for a while.
She stared at them.
You'll freeze. I've survived worse. Neither believed that. Another guard looked away, pretending not to notice. Voron hesitated, then unclasped a tiny silver wolf pendant from around his own neck. My daughter made this. He placed it gently into one of the blankets. If anyone ever finds you. His voice failed. Alara covered his hand. Not with anger, not with blame, only gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Those 2 words wounded the captain more deeply than any sword ever had. Without another sentence, he mounted his horse. The guards turned. Snow swallowed them one by one until nothing remained except hoofprints. And then those 2 disappeared beneath fresh white drifts. Alara stood alone. 8 newborn lives rested against her heartbeat. Above her, dark clouds swallowed the last glimpse of daylight. Ahead stretched nothing but endless forest buried beneath winter. Far away, hidden between towering pines, a pair of glowing silver eyes watched the lonely mother take her first step into the storm. And somewhere deep beneath the frozen mountain, something ancient stirred for the first time in centuries. The storm did not simply rage. It hunted. The wind rushed between the towering pines with a voice that sounded almost alive, shrieking through broken branches and jagged cliffs as though warning every living creature to flee. Snow no longer drifted gently from the sky. It attacked in blinding waves, swallowing rocks, trees, and narrow trails until the entire mountain became a single endless sea of white. Alara lowered her head against the wind. Each step sank to her knees. Each breath stabbed her chest with icy pain. The basket strapped across her back had grown heavier with every passing hour, not because the pups weighed more, but because her strength was slowly slipping away. Inside, 8 tiny bodies lay bundled together beneath Kalen's old cloak. They barely made a sound now. Their cries had faded into weak little whimpers, and that frightened Alara more than anything. A crying pup still had strength. Silence belonged to the cold. She stopped beside a towering pine whose branches bent beneath layers of snow. Carefully lifting the cloak, she touched each tiny forehead with trembling fingers.
Warm.
Still warm. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Stay with me, she whispered. I don't know how, but stay with me. The smallest pup stretched a tiny paw no bigger than her thumb and wrapped it around one of her fingers. It was such a simple gesture. Yet, in that frozen wilderness, it felt like a promise. Alara kissed the little paw before covering it again. Then she forced herself back onto her feet. The daylight disappeared long before evening arrived. Dark clouds swallowed what little sunlight remained until the forest became a maze of moving shadows. Every tree looked the same. Every path vanished beneath fresh snow. She had long since stopped trying to find the road. Now she searched only for shelter. The mountain offered none. Sharp rocks rose from the earth like broken teeth. Frozen streams cracked beneath thin layers of ice. Fallen trees lay buried beneath snow so deep they became invisible traps waiting beneath the surface. Twice she stumbled. The first time she caught herself against a tree. The second time she fell hard enough that one of the pups cried out. Her heart nearly stopped. She ripped open the blanket, expecting to see blood. Instead, 8 tiny faces blinked sleepily beneath the folds of wool. One yawned. Another reached toward the falling snow with tiny fingers. Despite everything, they were alive. Tears blurred Alara's vision. Not tears of despair. Relief. She laughed softly through trembling lips, the sound quickly stolen by the wind. You stubborn little wolves. The mountain answered with another violent gust. By nightfall the temperature fell even further. Her boots had frozen solid around her feet. She could no longer feel her fingers. Even breathing seemed to freeze inside her lungs before escaping. She knew the stories. Every Omega who gathered herbs in winter knew them. When the cold became unbearable, when exhaustion wrapped itself around the body like a warm blanket, sleep would begin to feel inviting. That was how the mountain claimed people. Not through violence. Through comfort, Alara slapped her own cheeks. Hard. The sting kept her awake. She bit the inside of her lip until she tasted blood. Anything to remain standing. I promised, she whispered into the darkness. I promised I'd protect you. The words were meant for her children, but somewhere deep inside, she spoke them to Kaelin as well. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time lost all meaning beneath the storm. Then, she noticed something strange. The wind had changed. Not weaker, different. Instead of striking her from every direction, it now rushed around her in a wide circle. Snow still fell heavily, yet a narrow path ahead remained strangely visible. It curved gently between the trees, almost inviting her. Alara frowned. No animal tracks crossed it. No footprints marked it. Still, something inside urged her forward. She followed. The forest grew quieter with every step. The howling wind faded until only the soft creaking of pine branches remained. Even the air felt different here, less cruel. At the end of the winding path stood the oldest tree Alara had ever seen. Its trunk was so enormous that 10 wolves holding hands could not have reached around it. Its roots burst from the frozen earth like the walls of an ancient fortress, twisting around one another before disappearing beneath deep snow. A hollow opened between those roots. Not large, but large enough. Hope fluttered inside her chest. She hurried toward it before the storm could change its mind. The hollow smelled of old wood, damp earth, pine resin, and something sweet she could not name. Most importantly, there was no wind. Alara quickly brushed away loose snow with numb hands before laying the pups inside the natural shelter. The roots curved overhead like giant protective arms. She blocked the entrance with broken branches and evergreen boughs until only a narrow opening remained for air. It was not much, but it might be enough. The pups stirred restlessly. They were hungry. She gathered them one by one into her arms, feeding each child despite her own body trembling from exhaustion. Outside, the blizzard roared. Inside, only tiny breathing filled the darkness. When the last pup finally drifted asleep, Alara leaned back against the rough bark. Her stomach ached with hunger. She remembered Captain Voron's dried meat. It still rested inside her satchel. She held it for a long moment. Her hands shook violently. One bite, just one, would give her enough strength to survive another day. Slowly, she looked toward the sleeping children. Without hesitation, she placed the meat back into the satchel. Tomorrow? If tomorrow came, the pups would need it more. She smiled weakly. It seems mothers never win arguments with hunger. Outside the shelter, something moved. A low growl rolled between the trees. Alara froze. Another growl answered from farther away. Then another. And another. Wolves. Not one. Many. She slowly reached for the only weapon she possessed, a broken branch barely thicker than her wrist. It would accomplish nothing, but doing nothing felt worse. Golden eyes appeared beyond the falling snow. Then another pair. Then 5. Then 10. The pack emerged soundlessly from the darkness. Massive mountain wolves. Their thick white coats blended almost perfectly with the storm. Their paws made no sound against the snow. They surrounded the ancient tree. Alara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The pups slept peacefully, unaware. The largest wolf stepped closer. He was enormous. Old scars crossed his muzzle. One ear had been torn years ago. His amber eyes reflected the moonlight breaking briefly through the clouds. Alara tightened her grip on the branch. If you're hungry, her voice cracked. Take me. The wolf continued walking. Closer, closer still, until only a few steps separated them. He lifted his nose. The cold air carried Alara's scent. Fear, milk,
Blood. Exhaustion.
love. The wolf stared into her eyes for a long moment. Then, he slowly lowered his head. Not in surrender. Not in weakness. In recognition. Behind him, every wolf in the pack did the same. Alara forgot to breathe. The old wolf turned away and climbed onto a nearby ridge overlooking the shelter. The others spread out around the clearing. Some lay beside fallen logs. Others settled beneath snow-covered pines. One remained near the entrance,
Watching. Guarding.
not hunting, protecting. All through the endless night, they never moved from their places. Whenever the wind shifted, they shifted with it. Whenever strange sounds echoed through the forest, ears lifted instantly. Twice bears wandered too close. Both times the wolves drove them away without a fight. Hours passed beneath silent protection. Near midnight, something even stranger happened. Snow continued falling from the sky, yet around the ancient pine, it refused to land. Instead, flakes drifted sideways, circling the shelter in slow, graceful patterns before settling farther away. The growing drifts formed smooth, white walls around the roots, not burying the hollow,
Shielding it.
the little shelter became hidden from the outside world, invisible, as though the mountain itself wished to keep it secret. Inside, Alara watched with tired eyes. Perhaps exhaustion had begun filling her mind with dreams. Perhaps, or perhaps, some promises were older than memory itself. The hours crawled onward. At some point, she must have closed her eyes. Only for a heartbeat. Only for a moment. Then,
A cry. Soft. New.
different. Alara's eyes flew open. Her heart lurched. One of the pups?
No.
She counted them instinctively.
1, 2,
3,
4, 5,
6,
7, 8.
all sleeping.
Then,
What had she heard? The cry came again. Tiny, fragile, from just beyond the entrance. The wolves outside did not react. The old Alpha remained seated upon the ridge, staring toward the stars as though expecting this moment. Alara pushed aside the evergreen branches. The storm had stopped. Moonlight spilled across untouched snow like silver silk. There, resting in the center of a circle of pale, white flowers somehow blooming through frozen earth, lay another infant, wrapped in fur as white as fresh snowfall. No footprints surrounded the child. No scent lingered in the air except pine, snow, and something ancient. The baby opened bright silver eyes. Instead of crying again, the child simply smiled and reached toward her. The moment Alara lifted the infant into her arms, every wolf in the clearing stood, together, perfectly still. Then, as one silent family, they raised their heads toward the moon. Their long, mournful howl echoed across the Frostfang Mountains. It was not the sound of hunters claiming a kill. It was the sound of guardians welcoming one long-awaited. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky with soft shades of gold, the wolves were gone. The strange flowers had vanished beneath fresh snow. Even the silver footprints that had briefly appeared around the child had disappeared without a trace. Only one impossible truth remained. Alara had entered the mountain with 8 newborn pups. As the first sunlight touched the ancient pine, she looked down into the tiny faces sleeping peacefully beneath Kalen's cloak, then counted them again.
1, 2,
3,
4,
5,
6, 7, 8, 9.
and somewhere beyond the distant peaks, a king named Rowan looked toward the same sunrise, unaware that fate had already begun leading him toward the greatest discovery of his life. The first light of dawn spilled slowly across the Frostfang Mountains, painting the endless fields of snow with shades of gold and pale blue. Frost clung to every branch like tiny crystals, sparkling beneath the rising sun. The storm that had raged without mercy for 3 days had vanished as though it had never existed. Silence settled over the wilderness. Not the silence of death. The silence that follows when nature itself seems to pause, waiting. Alara stepped carefully from beneath the ancient pine, the mysterious child resting quietly against her chest while the other 8 pups remained wrapped together inside Kalen's old cloak. Her body felt heavier than stone. Every muscle ached. Her lips had cracked from the cold, and her hands were so numb she could barely tighten the blankets around the children. Yet somehow, they had survived. She looked across the untouched valley. The snow reached almost to her knees, smooth and perfect beneath the morning light. There should have been tracks everywhere. The wolves, the strange flowers, whatever had placed the mysterious infant beside her shelter. Instead, The valley appeared untouched. Only her own footprints marked the snow. Alara slowly looked down at the child in her arms. Unlike the others, whose soft brown hair reminded her of Kaelin, this little one carried hair almost white enough to disappear against the blanket. Tiny silver eyelashes rested peacefully against warm cheeks, and every few moments the child smiled while sleeping, as though dreaming of something beautiful. No fear, no hunger, only peace. Alara gently brushed a snowflake from the infant's forehead. "Who are you?" The child answered only by curling tiny fingers around hers. She sighed softly. "I don't know where you came from." Her eyes drifted toward the mountain beyond the trees. But no one leaves a baby alone. The decision came as naturally as breathing. Whether the child belonged to wolves, to spirits, or to no one at all, the infant would not be abandoned. Not while Alara still breathed. She carefully tucked the mysterious baby beside the others, smiling faintly as one of the older pups instinctively shifted closer, wrapping a tiny arm around the newcomer as though they had always belonged together. 9 children. 1 family. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it somehow felt right. Far beyond the Frostfawn border, another kingdom greeted the morning very differently. Ashen Vale stretched across rolling hills and ancient forests where winter arrived gently instead of violently. Great stone bridges cross clear rivers that still flowed despite the season. Villages clustered around warm bakeries, smoking chimneys, and bustling marketplaces where travelers from distant lands exchanged stories beside crackling fires. The kingdom had known hardship, but unlike Frostfang, its ruler believed strength existed to protect, not to dominate. King Rowan stood upon the eastern wall of Ashen Keep, his dark cloak snapping gently in the cold breeze as he watched the distant mountains glow beneath the sunrise. He was younger than many expected a king to be. Broad-shouldered,
Calm.
his face carried the quiet confidence of someone who had survived enough battles to understand that victory always demanded a price. Across one cheek stretched a faded scar, earned years earlier, while defending a farming village from mountain raiders. He had never hidden it. Scars reminded rulers what swords truly cost. A massive gray wolf stood beside him.
Ash.
Unlike ordinary wolves, Ash carried himself with almost human awareness. His silver-gray coat shimmered beneath the morning light, and one intelligent amber eye remained fixed upon the northern horizon. The other eye had been lost long ago. No one knew how. Ash had never told. Not that wolves spoke with words. They spoke through trust. Rowan rested one hand against the wolf's neck. "You've been restless all morning." Ash lifted his nose. The wind carried countless scents across the valley. Snow, pine, elk, smoke. Then, something unfamiliar. The wolf suddenly stood, ears forward, muscles tense. Without warning, he bounded toward the castle gate. Rowan frowned.
Ash.
The wolf did not stop. Captain Cedric hurried across the courtyard. "Sire?" Rowan watched his companion disappear beyond the walls. "Ready my horse." Cedric blinked. "We ride north." "The Frostfawn border?" "Yes." "Has something happened?" Rowan's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. "I don't know." He smiled faintly, but Ash does. Within the hour, a small patrol rode through the northern forests. Only 6 riders accompanied the king. Rowan disliked unnecessary displays of power. The forest welcomed them with towering pines, frozen streams, and crisp air carrying the scent of fresh snow. Birdsong echoed between the branches. Everything appeared peaceful, until they noticed the wolves. One crossed the trail ahead, then another, then 3 more. None looked hungry. None behaved aggressively. They simply moved north. Steady, purposeful, as though answering a silent call. Captain Cedric frowned. "I've hunted these woods for 20 years. So have I. I've never seen wolves travel together like this." Neither had Rowan. More appeared from neighboring hills. White wolves, gray wolves, black wolves, old ones, young ones, entire packs, not fighting, not hunting, walking, all toward the same destination. Ash released a low rumble deep inside his chest. Not anger. Recognition. Rowan dismounted. What do you smell? Ash sniffed the air again before looking toward the mountains. Without hesitation, he continued walking. The king followed. Soon the horses could travel no farther. Snow buried the rocky paths. The patrol left the animals behind and continued on foot. The climb grew steeper. Hours passed. Wind strengthened. Yet the wolves continued ahead without hesitation. Until suddenly,
Every one of them stopped.
the forest became completely still. Not a single paw touched the snow. Not a single bird sang. Rowan stepped between two ancient pines. His breath caught. Below them lay a small hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs. At its center stood the largest pine he had ever seen. Its roots twisted across the earth like the walls of an ancient temple. The snow surrounding it had melted into a perfect circle despite the freezing air. Captain Cedric whispered, "Impossible." Ash slowly walked down the slope. No caution, no fear, only quiet certainty. Rowan followed. As they approached the tree, movement caught his eye. Someone emerged slowly from beneath the roots. A woman,
Thin. Pale.
exhausted. Her clothes hung in frozen tatters. Long chestnut hair clung to her face beneath layers of frost. Yet, even now, she shielded the basket against her chest before thinking of herself. Rowan immediately recognized the markings sewn onto her worn cloak. An Omega. From Frostfang. She looked at the approaching warriors. Instinctively, she stepped backward. Not because they had drawn weapons, because life had taught her that armed men rarely brought kindness. Captain Cedric quietly rested one hand upon his sword. "Sire." Rowan raised his own hand.
No.
His voice remained gentle. The Omega's knees trembled. She had reached the end of her strength. Still, she refused to let the basket leave her arms. Rowan slowly removed his fur-lined gloves, then unfastened his heavy cloak. He placed both upon the snow several steps away before kneeling. An unusual gesture. One king lowering himself before an unknown Omega. "My name is Rowan." His voice carried no command. "You're safe." The woman stared at him. Safe. The word sounded unfamiliar, almost impossible. "My children," she whispered. Rowan smiled softly. "They're the first thing I noticed." Alara hesitated. Slowly, she lowered the blanket. Captain Cedric looked inside. His eyes widened. "There are." He counted once, then again. 9. Rowan looked into the basket. 8 tiny infants slept peacefully together, curled close for warmth.
Then,
His gaze settled upon the 9th child. The white-haired infant opened bright silver eyes. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to fall silent. Ash stepped forward. Cedric instinctively reached for his sword. The old wolf ignored everyone else. He approached the basket until his nose nearly touched the mysterious child. Then something happened that Rowan had never witnessed before.
Ash.
The wolf who had faced bears without retreating, who had challenged mountain lions, who feared absolutely nothing, lowered his head.
Completely.
His nose gently brushed the infant's tiny hand. The child laughed. A soft, joyful sound. Small fingers wrapped around the wolf's thick fur. Ash closed his single amber eye. His tail touched the snow. Not submission.
Respect.
Captain Cedric whispered almost soundlessly. "I've never seen him bow." Neither had Rowan. Not once. A strange warmth spread across the clearing. The bitter wind disappeared. The air smelled suddenly of pine blossoms instead of ice.
Then,
Faint light shimmered beneath the snow. Rowan frowned. "What is that?" The snow at the base of the ancient pine began sliding away by itself.
slowly.
Silently, revealing enormous carvings hidden beneath centuries of ice. Circles, runes, ancient wolves, a great tree whose roots stretched across mountains. Symbols worn by time, yet still glowing with pale blue light. Captain Cedric's face turned white. "I know those markings." Rowan looked toward him. "The old temple." Cedric swallowed. "My grandmother used to tell stories about them." "What stories?" "That they belonged to the first guardians." "The ones from children's tales?" Cedric nodded uncertainly. They disappeared before the kingdoms existed. The glow brightened. The mysterious child reached one tiny hand toward the carvings. Instantly, the ancient runes blazed with brilliant silver light. The entire valley trembled. Snow cascaded from distant cliffs. Birds burst into the sky. Far away, a horn echoed across the mountains. Then another. Then another. Captain Cedric climbed a ridge and looked north. His expression hardened. "Sire." Rowan joined him. Across the distant mountain pass, dark banners appeared between the falling snow. Frostfang soldiers.
Dozens of them.
Perhaps more. Captain Cedric's hand tightened around his sword. "They're searching this valley." Rowan looked back toward Alara, toward the 9 sleeping children, toward the ancient symbols glowing brighter with every passing heartbeat. He finally understood why every wolf in the mountains had walked toward this forgotten place. This was no accident. Or something had protected this family. And now another king was coming to finish what the storm had failed to do. Rowan drew one slow breath before fastening his cloak around Alara's shoulders. Then he lifted the basket containing the 9 children as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. His voice remained calm, but every warrior beside him heard the unshakable promise within it. "No one touches them." Behind the ridge, the horns sounded again, closer this time, and the hunt for the 9 hearts had truly begun. The journey back to Ashenvale began beneath a sky the color of cold steel. Snow still blanketed the mountains, but the cruel fury of the blizzard had faded into a steady whisper drifting between the towering pines. Rowan led the way through the hidden trails known only to hunters and border scouts, carrying the basket himself despite Captain Cedric's repeated offers to help. No king carried infants through frozen mountains. Kings rode at the front of armies. Kings gave orders. Kings protected kingdoms from behind polished armor. But Rowan ignored every tradition. Every few moments, he looked down into the basket to make sure each tiny face still rose and fell with gentle breaths. 9 little lives. 9 impossible reasons for hope. Behind him, Alara walked carefully through the snow, wrapped inside Rowan's heavy wolf fur cloak. It nearly touched the ground around her feet, its warmth unlike anything she had felt in days. Even so, her steps remained uncertain. Not because she feared the mountain anymore. She feared kindness. Cruelty had become familiar. Kindness asked something much harder.
Trust.
She watched Rowan from behind, unable to understand why a king would burden himself with strangers. "You should let someone else carry them," she said quietly. Without looking back, Rowan smiled. "They're sleeping. They're heavy. They've earned the right to be." A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It was the first time she had laughed since Kaelin disappeared. The sound surprised even her. Rowan heard it. He said nothing. Some moments were too fragile to disturb. Ash padded beside Alara through the snow, never straying more than a few steps away. Whenever the path became steep, the great gray wolf slowed until she caught up, glancing back every few moments as though making certain she still followed. The other soldiers noticed. Captain Cedric leaned closer to Rowan. "He has adopted them." Rowan nodded. "I noticed. I've never seen him guard anyone this closely." "Neither have I." Cedric glanced toward the mysterious 9th child sleeping peacefully beneath the blankets. "There is something about that little one." "There is." Neither man tried to explain it. Some mysteries deserved patience. Far behind them, another patrol climbed into the valley beneath the ancient pine. Captain Voren dismounted first. The old soldier recognized the shelter immediately. His heart pounded against his ribs. "They survived." He whispered the words almost in disbelief. The natural den still stood between the enormous roots. Blankets remained inside. Tiny impressions where the children had slept still marked the ground. But the family was gone. One younger soldier frowned. They couldn't have traveled far. Another knelt near the entrance. "There are too many tracks." Indeed there were. Wolf tracks.
Hundreds of them.
Large.
Small. Old. Young.
Entire packs had gathered around the shelter. Captain Voren stared silently. He had hunted these mountains since childhood. No pack would willingly gather with another. Yet the snow revealed no signs of fighting, only circles, layer upon layer of protective paths surrounding the tree, as though every wolf had stood watch through the night. One soldier crossed himself nervously. The spirits. Vorin ignored him. Instead, he noticed something glimmering beneath a patch of melting ice. He brushed away the snow. Ancient carvings emerged from the frozen earth. His face drained of color. I've seen these before. The younger soldiers looked toward him. When? My grandfather. His voice grew distant. He served the temple guardians before the temples were abandoned. He told me these marks belonged to the first keepers. Another soldier swallowed. I thought those were stories. So did I. A distant horn echoed across the valley. Then another. King Darius had arrived. His black stallion stopped beside the ancient tree. Unlike Rowan, Darius did not kneel. He looked at the abandoned shelter with narrowed eyes. They escaped. Captain Vorin lowered his head. Yes, my king. Darius climbed from his horse and examined the strange carvings. His expression hardened. So, he whispered, the prophecy breathes. He turned sharply. Search every trail leading south. One captain hesitated. The storm erased most of the tracks. Then follow the wolves. The soldier blinked. The wolves, sire? Darius looked toward the endless footprints surrounding the tree. They know. His voice became colder. And wherever those beasts are going. His eyes settled upon the glowing runes one final time. That is where my enemies are. 3 days later, the towers of Ashen Keep rose above the hills like something from an old song. Built from pale gray stone gathered from the surrounding mountains, the fortress overlooked wide green valleys where smoke drifted peacefully from village chimneys. Thick walls surrounded the city, yet flowering vines still climbed between the stones even in winter, protected by warm springs flowing beneath the earth. Children played near the gates. Merchants laughed in crowded markets. Blacksmiths worked beside glowing forges. Unlike Frostfang, people smiled here. The enormous gates slowly opened. Trumpets announced their king's return. Citizens gathered along the streets expecting another victorious hunt. Instead, they watched Rowan walk through the gates carrying a basket. Whispers spread instantly. Children. Whose are they? Is that an Omega? She's from Frostfang. The king brought home a Frostfang Omega? The whispers grew louder. Not cruel. Curious. Rowan ignored every one of them. He walked directly toward the castle. Ash remained beside Alara the entire way. Several curious children approached the giant wolf before their parents hurried them back. Yet Ash showed no interest in anyone except the woman following Rowan. By sunset, the council chamber had filled. Lord Garrick, the oldest noble in Ashen Vale, leaned heavily upon his carved cane. His silver beard reached almost to his belt, and his sharp blue eyes missed very little. Around him stood generals, merchants, scholars, and advisors. None appeared pleased. Lord Garrick spoke first. Your Majesty. Rowan remained standing. You crossed the Frostfang border. Yes. You returned with an Omega.
Yes.
And 9 infants. Yes. A long silence settled over the chamber. Finally Garrick sighed. You realize King Darius will see this as an insult. I imagine he already does. Another council member stepped forward. What if they're carrying disease? The royal healers have examined them. They're healthy. What if Frostfang demands their return? Rowan answered without hesitation. They abandoned them. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. An elderly scholar cleared his throat. Forgive my boldness, Your Majesty, but there are rumors. What kind? That one of the children, he hesitated, is not ordinary. Before Rowan could answer, the great doors opened. The royal physician entered carrying one of the infants, the mysterious, white-haired child. The little one looked around the room with bright, curious eyes before suddenly laughing. A simple laugh.
Soft.
Innocent. Beautiful. At that exact moment, a deep cracking sound echoed outside. Everyone turned toward the windows. The river below the castle had remained frozen for nearly 2 months. Now, The thick ice split apart. Clear water rushed freely beneath the evening sun. The physicians stopped walking. "My king!" Outside, startled guards shouted. Servants hurried across the courtyard. People pointed toward the orchards surrounding the castle. Tiny white blossoms had appeared across trees that should have remained asleep until spring. One by one, flower after flower, opened beneath the winter sky. Inside the council chamber, absolute silence settled. The child laughed again. Another miracle followed. One elderly guard who had limped for years slowly lowered the walking stick supporting his weight. He blinked, then cautiously took one step. No pain. Another. Still none. His eyes filled with tears. He dropped the cane entirely. The room erupted into stunned whispers. Lord Garrick stared at the child. What? He struggled to find words. What is happening? No one answered. Because no one knew. Over the following weeks, strange blessings spread across Ashen Vale. Shepherds reported that newborn lambs survived nights that normally claimed entire flocks. Old wells filled with fresh water despite the frozen ground. Fields thought ruined by frost began showing patches of green. Even wild animals wandered closer to villages without fear. Everywhere the mysterious child went, life quietly followed. Alara noticed it too. One afternoon, she carried the children into the castle gardens. Snow still covered the paths. She sat beneath an old oak tree while feeding the youngest. Nearby stood a rose bush that had withered years earlier. Its branches were dry and brittle. The white-haired child reached toward it. Tiny fingers barely brushed one frozen stem. Nothing happened. Alara smiled. You've heard the stories too, have you? She kissed the baby's forehead, then looked away. When she turned back moments later, a single crimson rose had bloomed.
Bright. Perfect.
Against the snow. A gentle breeze carried its sweet fragrance through the garden. Alara simply stared. Not in fear. In wonder. She carefully plucked the rose. No matter who you are, she whispered to the little one. You were sent for a reason. High above them, unseen from the garden below, Rowan watched from a castle balcony. Beside him stood the kingdom's oldest historian, Master Aldrin. The elderly scholar had spent decades collecting forgotten legends buried inside abandoned temples and ruined libraries. He watched the blooming rose for a long moment, then quietly spoke. I feared I would never see this in my lifetime. Rowan looked toward him. You know something. Aldrin nodded slowly. There is an old name, he swallowed. One almost every kingdom tried to erase. What name? The Heart of Winter. Rowan frowned. I've never heard it. Very few have. The old scholar's weathered hands trembled as he reached inside his robe and withdrew a worn leather journal. Its pages were faded with age. Its cover carried the same symbol Rowan had seen glowing beneath the ancient pine. A great tree, its roots embracing the mountains. Aldrin opened the fragile book. The ink had nearly disappeared. Still, one passage remained clear. He read it softly. When the land can no longer bear the weight of a cruel crown, winter itself shall choose a heart untouched by pride. Through that child, forgotten mercy shall bloom where fear once ruled. Rowan slowly closed the journal. The child. Aldrin nodded. I believe the prophecy has awakened. Before Rowan could answer, the great warning bell atop Ashen Keep began ringing.
Once. Twice.
Again. Again. A breathless messenger burst into the chamber, his face pale beneath the torchlight. He dropped to one knee. My king. He struggled for breath. Frostfang banners have crossed the northern border. The room fell silent. Outside, snow began falling once more. Only this time, it carried the promise of war. The warning bells echoed across Ashen Vale long after the messenger had delivered his news. Their deep voices rolled over the castle walls, through the sleeping villages, across the frozen rivers, and into the dark forests, where wolves lifted their heads toward the sound. One by one, lights flickered to life in cottages throughout the valley. Blacksmiths hurried to their forges. Stable hands prepared horses. Guards climbed the towers, their armor clinking softly in the cold night air. War had not arrived, but It had stepped onto the road. Inside Ashen Keep, Rowan stood before the great map carved into the council chamber floor. Small wooden markers representing villages, rivers, mountain passes, and watchtowers covered the polished stone. Captain Cedric placed a black marker along the northern border. Our scouts counted nearly 300 soldiers. Rowan folded his arms. 300 is too many for a border patrol. Cedric nodded. They've built camps instead of moving on. Lord Garrick rested both hands upon his cane. Darius isn't invading.
No.
He's searching. Rowan looked toward the window overlooking the snowy valley. And he won't stop. The room fell quiet. Everyone understood what Darius wanted. Not land. Not gold. 9 children. Especially one. Master Aldrin slowly closed the ancient journal resting before him. If the prophecy is true, he hesitated. He fears what the child represents. Rowan answered without taking his eyes from the mountains. He fears hope. Far beyond the border, King Darius sat alone inside Frostfang Keep. The enormous hall had once been filled with music during winter festivals. Now only silence remained. The fire inside the great stone hearth burned low, throwing long shadows across polished floors. Captain Voran stood several steps away, waiting. Darius slowly turned the silver wolf pendant in his hand. The one Voran had secretly given Alara. His scouts had found another matching pendant inside the abandoned cottage. He recognized the design. Simple. Handmade. Harmless. Yet, somehow, it angered him. You pitted her. Voran said nothing. You left supplies. Silence. You gave her hope. The captain lowered his head. I gave food to hungry children. You disobeyed me. I obeyed every order you gave. Darius stared into the fire. Do you believe I'm cruel? Voran answered carefully. I believe fear has become your closest advisor. The hall became very still. Most men would have been executed before finishing such a sentence. Darius simply smiled.
Not warmly. Sadly.
When I was a boy, he murmured, my father ignored a prophecy. Voran looked up. He called it foolishness. The king walked slowly toward one of the frozen windows. By spring, his reflection stared back at him. Half our kingdom lay buried beneath rebellion. His fingers tightened against the stone. I watched wolves drag bodies through streets. I buried my mother. I buried my brothers. His voice remained calm, almost too calm. I learned something. He finally turned. Prophecies become dangerous because people choose to believe them. Voran met his gaze. Then perhaps you should stop giving them reasons. For the first time that evening, anger crossed Darius's face. They will destroy everything. They're infants. They're symbols. The king stepped closer. You kill a wolf. Another takes its place. You kill an idea. He let the sentence fade. Voran quietly finished it. And it grows. Neither man spoke again. Outside, snow began falling harder. Life inside Ashenvale changed with the passing weeks. The castle no longer echoed with worry alone. Tiny laughter now drifted through its halls. Servants who once hurried silently from room to room found excuses to linger outside the nursery. Even the oldest guards smiled more often. The children were growing. Not quickly. Naturally. Each had begun revealing a personality as unique as the stars above the mountains. The eldest boy, Kale, rarely cried. Instead, he watched everything with thoughtful amber eyes, studying people long before reaching for them. Little Mira smiled at everyone she met, even strangers. Finn somehow escaped every blanket wrapped around him. Lena loved birds. Whenever sparrows landed outside the nursery window, she would clap her tiny hands until they hopped closer. The twins, Rowan jokingly called them the whirlwind pair, somehow managed to crawl into places no one imagined possible. Every child carried a small piece of Kalen's quiet spirit. Every child, except one. The white-haired infant remained different. Not distant. Simply different. The child laughed often, rarely cried. And every animal that crossed the castle grounds seemed unable to ignore that laughter. One snowy afternoon, Alara carried the children into the royal gardens. Ash followed close behind, as always. The giant wolf had become less like a guardian and more like an enormous patient shadow. Wherever the children crawled, Ash watched. Wherever they laughed, his tail brushed quietly against the snow. The castle gardeners had nearly given up trying to protect flower beds. The children found every one of them. Elara settled beneath a stone arch wrapped in sleeping vines while the older infants played upon thick wool blankets spread across the grass. The mysterious child sat quietly nearby. A robin fluttered down onto a nearby branch. Then another. Then three. Within moments, dozens of birds surrounded the little clearing. Not frightened. Curious. The white-haired child stretched out one tiny hand. The smallest robin flew directly onto those little fingers. Its wings folded peacefully. Elara stopped breathing. The bird remained there for nearly a minute before gently hopping onto the child's shoulder. Then, something even stranger happened. A frightened rabbit burst from nearby bushes. Behind it raced a young fox. Normally the chase would have ended in blood. Instead, the fox suddenly slowed. The rabbit stopped running. Both animals turned toward the child. The little one smiled. The fox quietly lay down. The rabbit cautiously hopped beside it. Predator and prey, sharing the same patch of snow. Ash watched without moving. His single amber eye reflected something deeper than instinct. Recognition. As though he had seen such peace before. Long ago, word spread quickly. Villagers began arriving at the castle gates, carrying injured birds, orphaned fawns, and exhausted horses that no healer had been able to calm. Rowan almost refused them. He feared turning the children into legends before they understood themselves. Yet Elara saw the hope inside people's eyes. One morning, an elderly shepherd arrived carrying a lamb whose front leg had shattered beneath a fallen cart. The old man removed his cap. "I've walked for 2 days." Elara gently accepted the trembling animal. "I'm no miracle worker." "I know. I only mend wounds." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes that's miracle enough." She carefully cleaned the injury while the white-haired child watched quietly from a blanket nearby. The lamb cried softly. Then the child crawled over. Tiny fingers rested against the lamb's wool. Immediately, the frightened animal relaxed. Its breathing slowed. Its trembling stopped. Nothing magical happened. The broken leg remained broken. But the fear disappeared. The shepherd's eyes filled with tears. "It trusts." Elara smiled. "So do you." She finished binding the leg. Weeks later, the shepherd returned. The lamb walked beside him, perfectly healthy. He never forgot the kindness shown that day. Nor did the dozens of others who quietly carried hope back to their villages. Hope, however, has a way of frightening cruel men. Reports reached Frostfang faster than birds. Fields blooming, animals gathering peacefully, children surviving harsh winters. The mysterious child calming even the wildest beasts. Each story deepened Darius's growing obsession. They're turning her into a symbol. He slammed another report onto the council table. His advisors remained silent. Finally, one elderly noble spoke. "Perhaps they're only stories." Darius looked at him. "Stories become banners." The noble swallowed. "What would you have us do?" The king slowly approached an ancient iron chest standing against the wall. Its surface bore dozens of rusted locks. No servant had touched it for generations. Captain Voran's expression darkened. "My king." Darius ignored him. One by one, he unlocked each chain. Ancient black smoke escaped through tiny cracks before the lid even opened. The chamber suddenly grew colder. Candles flickered. Several advisors instinctively stepped backward. Voran's voice became urgent. "You swore never to disturb those relics." "I swore many things." The final lock fell away. Darius lifted the heavy lid. Inside rested an object wrapped in faded black cloth. He carefully unfolded it. An ancient stone carved with twisting crimson symbols. The room seemed to breathe. Every torch dimmed. Master sorcerers had once called it the Heartstone, forged centuries earlier during the War of Broken Moons. Powered by grief, fed by hatred, forbidden by every kingdom. Voran stared in horror.
No.
Darius lifted the stone. If mercy awakens old legends. His eyes hardened. Then fear will awaken older ones. That same evening, high above the Frostfang Mountains, something changed. Clouds gathered, without warning. Not ordinary storm clouds. These were darker,
Heavier.
the stars disappeared one after another beneath a blanket of unnatural shadow. Deep inside forgotten caves, sleeping creatures opened ancient eyes. Bears abandoned their dens in the middle of winter. Ravens exploded from the treetops in frightened flocks. Entire wolf packs began running south. Not hunting, fleeing. Ash lifted his head toward the northern horizon. A deep growl rolled from his chest. Alara looked up from the nursery window. The air felt wrong. The wind carried no scent of pine, only cold stone and ash. Far beneath the mountains, something ancient shifted in its endless sleep. Its heartbeat echoed once through the earth. Then again, the castle walls trembled. Candles flickered throughout Ashen Keep. The white-haired child suddenly stopped laughing. For the very first time, the little one began to cry. And every wolf across both kingdoms answered with a long, mournful howl that carried through the night like a warning from an age the world had almost forgotten. The cry of the white-haired child did not end when dawn came. It lingered through the morning like a note of sorrow carried by the wind, quiet but unbroken, settling over Ashen Vale until even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. The warmth that had filled the kingdom during the previous weeks slowly faded. Frost crept back across rooftops. The streams that had only recently begun flowing wore thin skins of ice once again. The blooming roses in the royal gardens closed their petals before the sun had fully risen, as though hiding from something unseen. People noticed. Farmers paused in their fields. Shepherds counted restless flocks that refused to graze. Children who usually laughed while chasing one another through the village squares stood close to their parents instead, glancing nervously toward the northern mountains. Nature had begun holding its breath. Inside Ashen Keep, Rowan stood upon the highest tower with Captain Cedric and Master Aldrin. Far beyond the forests, the horizon had disappeared beneath a wall of black clouds. Not gray, not blue, black. They did not drift with the wind. They crawled slowly across the mountains like living shadows swallowing the world one valley at a time. Cedric narrowed his eyes. I've never seen clouds move against the wind. You haven't, Aldrin answered quietly. Because these are not clouds. Rowan looked toward the old scholar. What are they? The elderly man closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. The old books called them the Morning Veil. The first sign that forbidden magic has awakened. Silence settled between them. Rowan rested both hands upon the cold stone wall. Darius. Aldrin nodded. He has opened something that should have remained buried. The king did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed upon the dark horizon. I feared he would send soldiers. Cedric followed his eyes. Instead, he sent winter itself. By sunset, the first villages along the northern border disappeared beneath snow unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. The storm did not simply cover the roads. It buried entire homes. Walls vanished. Barn roofs collapsed beneath impossible weight. Hunters returning from the forests wandered in circles despite knowing every trail by heart. Even the oldest oak trees cracked beneath the freezing wind. Messenger after messenger arrived at Ashen Keep. The village of Briar Hollow has vanished. The eastern bridge is gone. The northern watchtower no longer answers its signal fires. Rowan listened to every report. Each one tightened the lines around his eyes. The council demanded that the army march immediately. Others argued that defending the capital mattered more. Fear spread through the chamber faster than reason. Finally, Rowan struck the great oak table with the flat of his hand. The room fell silent. We protect the people first. No one argued. Within the hour, soldiers rode toward every threatened village. Wagons filled with blankets, food, medicine, and firewood followed close behind. Alara watched them leave from the castle gate. One by one, mothers embraced sons. Children clung to fathers. Old couples whispered hurried prayers before wagons disappeared into the growing snow. The sight stirred memories she had tried desperately to bury. Kaelin walking away beneath a winter sky, promising to return. She instinctively tightened her arms around the children. Rowan noticed. He stepped beside her. "We'll stop this." She wanted to believe him. Instead, she looked toward the approaching darkness. "It isn't the storm that frightens me." He turned. "What does?" Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon. The man willing to create it. The storm reached Ashenvale before midnight. It arrived without thunder, without lightning, only silence. Then, snow. Great heavy flakes drifted gently from the sky. Beautiful, almost peaceful, until they touched the ground. The moment each flake landed, frost spread outward across stone and grass like pale fingers racing through the earth. Castle guards watched torches extinguish one after another despite standing beneath covered walls. Stable horses kicked nervously against their stalls. Dogs whimpered. Ash stood in the center of the courtyard, every muscle tense. His thick gray fur bristled along his spine. He did not bark. He listened. Far away, something answered.
A roar. Deep.
Ancient. Powerful enough that the castle windows trembled. Several guards instinctively reached for their swords. Captain Cedric frowned. What was that? No one answered. Because no one knew. By morning, creatures began emerging from the mountains. Not armies. Animals. A great elk burst through the southern gates, eyes wide with terror. It charged straight through the marketplace before collapsing from exhaustion. Moments later, a family of mountain goats stumbled into the city. Then wolves, foxes,
Bears.
animals that would normally hunt one another now fled side by side. None attacked. None stopped. They ran as though escaping something behind them. The people stared in stunned silence. Ash walked slowly among them. He sniffed each frightened creature, then looked north once more. The old wolf released a low mournful howl. Every fleeing animal froze. For one long heartbeat, the entire city stood silent. Then all the creatures continued south together. A single living river of frightened life. Master Aldrin watched from the city wall. The mountain is emptying. Rowan joined him. What could frighten every creature? The old scholar whispered only 2 words. The Hollow King. That evening, Rowan gathered every warrior inside the great hall. Armor gleamed beneath torchlight. Swords rested against polished boots. Maps covered every table. We march at dawn. Cedric nodded firmly. Our scouts located the storm's edge. We'll meet it before it reaches the heart of the kingdom. The soldiers struck fists against their armor. Confidence filled the room. Alara, however, remained silent. She stood near the back, holding the white-haired child while the other 8 slept nearby beneath the care of castle nurses. Something troubled her. Not fear. Recognition. The child's silver eyes remained fixed upon the ancient journal resting beside Master Aldrin. Without thinking, Alara walked toward it. The little one stretched out one tiny hand. The worn pages began turning by themselves. One page, then another, until the journal stopped near its very end. A sketch filled the yellowed parchment. An enormous tree growing from the center of a hidden valley. Its roots reached beneath mountains. Its branches touched the stars. Below the drawing, faded words barely remained. Aldrin leaned closer, carefully reading them aloud. When darkness devours the paths of men, seek the sanctuary beyond the storm. Only the heart freely offered may awaken the first light. The room fell quiet. Rowan frowned. The sanctuary still exists? I believed it was only legend. Alara looked at the drawing. A strange memory stirred inside her. Not a memory of seeing the place. A feeling. The same scent she had noticed beneath the ancient pine. The same quiet warmth. The same impossible peace. She whispered almost to herself, I've been there. Everyone turned. You have? Rowan asked gently. She slowly nodded. I don't know how, but her fingers traced the roots drawn across the page. The tree. The smell. The silence. Her breathing became shallow. It was the place where they found me. Master Aldrin's eyes widened. The ancient pine. The shelter. He looked toward Rowan. It wasn't merely a hiding place. It was the first gate. The sanctuary lies beyond it. Later that night, long after the castle had fallen silent, Alara sat alone inside the nursery. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, painting silver patterns across the wooden floor. The children slept peacefully, all except the white-haired child. The little one remained awake, watching the stars beyond the glass. Alara gently rocked the child in her arms. "What are you trying to tell me?" A soft breeze drifted through the room despite the closed windows. The nursery candles flickered. One by one, tiny lights appeared outside. Not stars. Fireflies.
Hundreds of them.
In winter, they floated silently toward the northern mountains, forming a glowing path through the darkness. The child smiled, then pointed. Alara's heart began beating faster. She understood. The sanctuary was calling. Before sunrise, she found Rowan standing alone in the courtyard preparing his horse. He looked surprised to see her. "You should be resting." She shook her head.
No.
He immediately noticed the determination in her eyes. What happened? She told him everything. The journal, the fireflies, the feeling that had awakened inside her. When she finished, Rowan remained silent for several moments. Finally, he asked the question already haunting both of them. "You believe the sanctuary wants you?"
No.
She looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. "I think." Her voice trembled. "It wants this little one." Cedric approached just then. "The army is ready." Rowan nodded, then looked back at Alara. "If there's even a chance the sanctuary can stop the storm?" He hesitated. "We cannot ignore it." Master Aldrin joined them carrying the ancient journal. "The old writings are clear. The sanctuary cannot be reached by an army. Only by one who carries the heart." Silence. Rowan looked at the rows of waiting soldiers. Then at Alara. Then at the child. He made his decision. The army rides north to hold back the darkness. His eyes met Alara's. "You will go to the sanctuary." She stared at him. "Alone?"
No.
He fastened his sword. "You will never walk into danger alone again." As dawn broke over Ashenvale, two journeys began. Thousands of soldiers marched toward the black storm gathering across the mountains. Their banners snapped proudly in the freezing wind. Behind them came healers, wagons, and villagers carrying supplies. Hope marched beside them, far away from the army. Alara slipped quietly into the ancient forest carrying only the white-haired child against her heart. Ash walked at her left, Rowan at her right. No banners, no trumpets, no armor shining beneath the sun. Only three determined souls following a trail of winter fireflies into a wilderness no living traveler had entered for centuries. Behind them, the remaining 8 children watched from the castle nursery window, their tiny hands pressed gently against the glass. None of them understood why their mother was leaving. None of them knew. The sanctuary waiting beyond the storm would demand a price greater than any of them could imagine. The forest beyond the ancient pine did not welcome travelers. It watched them. The towering trees stood so close together that daylight struggled to reach the ground. Their trunks were wider than the walls of village homes, their bark silver with age, their roots twisting through the earth like sleeping serpents. Moss covered the stones in soft emerald blankets untouched by frost, and yet the air carried the unmistakable bite of winter. No bird sang. No insects hummed. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the silence. Only the faint glow of hundreds of winter fireflies drifted ahead, floating deeper into the forgotten wilderness like tiny stars leading the way. Alara followed them without hesitation. The white-haired child rested peacefully against her chest, wrapped inside Rowan's heavy cloak. Unlike the world around them, the child seemed untouched by the cold. Small silver eyes watched the glowing insects with quiet curiosity, every so often reaching tiny fingers toward them. Whenever the child laughed, 1 or 2 fireflies would circle happily around those little hands before returning to the glowing trail. Ash walked several paces ahead. His ears remained upright. Every few moments he stopped to sniff the air, then continued forward without making a sound. Behind Alara, Rowan kept one hand near the hilt of his sword, though instinct told him steel would be of little use in this place. The forest did not feel dangerous. It felt ancient, like stepping inside a memory older than kingdoms themselves. Master Aldrin's words echoed quietly inside Rowan's mind. Some places are protected not by walls, but by truth. He was beginning to understand. Hours passed without a single sign of another living soul. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. Trees whose branches had been bare only moments earlier slowly unfolded fresh green leaves as the child passed beneath them. Frozen streams broke free from their icy prisons, the water laughing softly over polished stones. White flowers emerged through patches of snow that should have buried them until spring. Nothing happened suddenly. Everything unfolded gently, as though the land itself was awakening from a long sleep. Alara noticed the changes, but said nothing. Her thoughts remained with the 8 children she had left behind. She could still picture them standing at the nursery window, tiny hands pressed against the glass, wide, curious eyes following her until the forest disappeared from sight. For the first time since leaving Ashenvale, her steps slowed. Rowan quietly came beside her. "You're thinking about them?" She smiled sadly. "A mother is always thinking about her children." He nodded. "My own mother used to say the same." Alara looked at him. "You lost her young." It was not a question. Rowan's expression softened. "I was 12. They walked a little farther before he continued. "She always knew when I was frightened. Even when I smiled." He laughed quietly. "I never understood how." Alara looked down at the sleeping child. "Mothers hear things the world cannot." Their eyes met. Neither spoke again. Some conversations required no more words. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the fireflies slowed. One by one, they gathered around a towering stone arch rising from the earth. It had no doors, no carvings, only smooth gray stone wrapped in flowering vines despite the season. Beyond the arch, nothing, only mist. Ash stopped. For the first time since leaving Ashenvale, the old wolf refused to take another step. He sat quietly before the stone arch, head lowered, waiting. Rowan frowned. "What is it?" Ash simply looked toward Alara, then toward the child. Master Aldrin's journal suddenly slipped from Rowan's saddlebag and landed open upon the ground. A single sentence caught the fading light. "Only the willing heart may cross where pride cannot." The words settled heavily between them. Alara slowly stepped forward. The moment she crossed beneath the stone arch, the mist vanished. Rowan stared in amazement. An entire valley had been hidden behind it. The sanctuary. It was more beautiful than any legend could have imagined. A crystal lake reflected the evening sky so perfectly that the stars appeared to shine both above and below. Great silver trees stretched toward the heavens, their leaves glowing softly like moonlight caught in living branches. Flowers of every color covered rolling hills untouched by winter. White wolves wandered peacefully beside deer. Foxes slept beside rabbits. Even great bears rested beneath fruit trees, without disturbing the birds nesting above them. No fear lived here, only balance. At the center of the valley stood an enormous tree. Its trunk was wider than the castle towers of Ashenvale. Its roots spread through the earth like rivers. Its branches disappeared among the stars. Alara's breath caught. "The tree," she whispered. "It was here all along." The child smiled. The moment tiny feet touched the grass, the great tree awakened. Light flowed through every root like golden rivers beneath clear water. Thousands of glowing leaves drifted gently through the valley. The air filled with the scent of pine, rain, wildflowers, and warm earth after spring. Then, someone stepped from behind the tree. Not a wolf. Not entirely human. An elderly woman dressed in robes woven from leaves and silver threads approached with slow, graceful steps. Her long white hair flowed almost to the ground. Golden eyes reflected centuries of quiet wisdom. Animals bowed their heads as she passed. Even Ash lowered himself respectfully. She smiled gently at Alara. "We have waited a very long time." Alara tightened her hold on the child. "Who are you?" "The last keeper." My name has been forgotten. I am simply the one who remained. Rowan stepped beside Alara. You know this child. The keeper looked toward the little one. I knew this soul before kingdoms had names. Silence settled over the valley. Finally, Alara whispered the question that had lived inside her heart since the storm. Who is this child? The keeper knelt before them. This child was never born to one kingdom, nor to one family. The heart of winter is not a person. It is a promise. She gently touched the child's forehead. When greed darkens the land, when rulers place fear above mercy, when the innocent suffer for another's pride, the mountain chooses again. Alara struggled to understand. You placed the child beside me.
No.
The keeper smiled. You did. Alara stared at her. I've never been here, not in body, but your heart reached us. The night you chose to give your last warmth to your children instead of yourself. The keeper's eyes shimmered. The mountain answered. She looked toward Rowan. The child needed a mother who would love without asking who the child belonged to. Her gaze returned to Alara. You never questioned. You simply opened your arms. A tear slipped quietly down Alara's cheek. I couldn't leave a baby alone. Exactly. The keeper smiled. That is why the mountain trusted you. The peaceful silence suddenly broke. Far beyond the valley, the ground trembled. A deep roar echoed through the mountains. Black clouds rolled across the sky beyond the sanctuary's invisible borders. The keeper's expression grew solemn. He has awakened, the Hollow King. Rowan gripped his sword. What is it? Not what. The keeper looked toward the storm. Who? She raised one hand. The surface of the crystal lake rippled. Images appeared. King Darius stood within the ruins of an ancient temple, the crimson heartstone glowing in his hands. Dark shadows poured from the earth around him. At his feet knelt creatures formed from ice, smoke, and broken armor. Their empty eyes burned crimson. Behind them, something enormous stirred beneath the mountain itself. A giant figure trapped inside black ice. Its face hidden, its heartbeat shaking the earth. The Hollow King was once a guardian, the keeper whispered. He gave everything to protect these lands. But grief poisoned his heart. He began believing that only fear could keep peace. The darkness consumed him. She looked toward Darius. And now another king has chained himself to the same lie. The vision faded. Silence returned. Only the heartbeat beneath the mountain remained.
Slow.
Powerful. Closer. The keeper turned back toward Alara. There is only one path left. What must we do? The old woman closed her eyes. The heart of winter must return to the first tree. Alara looked down at the child sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. What does that mean? The keeper's voice became almost unbearably gentle. You must leave the child here. Everything inside Alara froze.
No.
The sanctuary will protect.
No.
She stepped backward. I promised. I won't abandon another child. The child will not be abandoned. You will. The keeper's eyes filled with sorrow. If the heart remains in the world of kings, the darkness will never stop hunting. The child belongs to the balance, not to any throne. Alara shook her head again and again.
No.
Her voice broke. I buried my husband. I lost my home. I nearly lost my children. I cannot lose this one too. The valley remained silent. Even the wind seemed to mourn with her. Rowan slowly stepped beside her. His own heart felt as though it were being torn apart. He looked at the keeper. There must be another way. There is. The keeper met his gaze. You may give another heart instead. Rowan frowned. What do you mean? The first tree accepts only willing sacrifice. The child may stay.
She paused.
If another freely gives everything in the child's place. Without hesitation, Rowan stepped forward. Then take mine. Alara's head snapped toward him.
What?
He smiled sadly. My kingdom still has good people. Cedric. Garrick. They'll lead. Your children need you more than they need a king. No. Alara grabbed his arm. You don't get to decide that. I already have. His voice remained calm. If one life saves thousands, it should be mine. The keeper watched them quietly. Neither fear nor surprise crossed her face. Only hope, because for the first time in countless centuries, someone had offered everything, without being asked. At that very moment, the white-haired child opened gentle silver eyes. The little one looked first at Alara, then at Rowan. Small fingers reached toward both of them. A warm golden light slowly spread from the child's tiny hands. The great first tree began to glow brighter than ever before. Its branches trembled. Its roots awakened. The sanctuary itself seemed to draw a deep breath. The keeper looked upward in astonishment. "No," she whispered. "The prophecy. It has changed." Far beyond the sanctuary, the mountains shook with a force powerful enough to split ancient cliffs. The Hollow King had awakened completely, and the choice that would decide the fate of two kingdoms no longer belonged to prophecy alone. It belonged to love. The first rays of dawn had not yet reached the mountains when the first tree burst into light. Its branches shimmered like rivers of gold flowing through the night sky. Every silver leaf began to glow, and the roots beneath the sanctuary pulsed with a gentle heartbeat that echoed through the earth. The crystal lake mirrored the light until it seemed as though the stars themselves had descended into the valley. Alara shielded her eyes. Rowan stood motionless beside her. Even the keeper took one slow step backward. The white-haired child remained in Alara's arms, smiling peacefully, untouched by the overwhelming brilliance surrounding them. Then the child stretched out both tiny hands, one toward Alara, the other toward Rowan. The golden light wrapped around them like warm sunlight after a lifetime of winter. The keeper's eyes widened. "The heart," she whispered, "has chosen." Far beyond the sanctuary, the black clouds swirling above the Frostfang Mountains suddenly stopped moving. The unnatural wind fell silent. Snow froze in midair for the briefest heartbeat before drifting harmlessly to the ground. Every wolf across both kingdoms lifted its head. Every bird fell quiet. Every river seemed to pause. Nature itself waited. Deep beneath the mountains, inside the ruined temple where ancient darkness had awakened, King Darius stood before the crimson heartstone. The stone no longer glowed steadily. Its light flickered, like a dying fire. Dark shadows circled around him in restless waves. The Hollow King rose slowly from the broken ice, imprisoning him for centuries. He towered over every living creature, his body formed from ancient armor wrapped in black frost. Empty eyes burned like dying embers beneath a cracked crown, and every step shook the ruined temple beneath his feet. The creatures born from the darkness bowed before him. Darius did not. He believed he still controlled what he had awakened. "You were created to obey." The Hollow King slowly turned his head. For the first time in countless centuries, he spoke. His voice sounded like mountains breaking beneath glaciers. "I obey." Silence swallowed the chamber. No fear. The heartstone cracked. A thin line spread across its surface. Darius frowned. "What have you done?" The Hollow King looked beyond the temple walls. Beyond the mountains. Beyond the storm itself. The heart has awakened. For the first time in his life, King Darius felt genuine fear. Inside the sanctuary, the keeper lowered herself onto one knee before the first tree. "It has never happened before." Rowan looked toward her. "What hasn't?" The heart was meant to choose one. Her gaze rested upon Alara and the child. It chose many. The golden light surrounding the child slowly drifted outward. It did not remain within the mysterious infant. Instead, it separated into 8 gentle streams. Each beam raced across the mountains toward Ashenvale, toward the castle, toward the nursery where the 8 abandoned pups still slept beneath warm blankets. As the light reached them, every child opened sleepy eyes. Kale smiled. Mira laughed. Finn reached toward the glowing ceiling. One after another, each tiny heartbeat answered the ancient call. The light settled gently inside them, not as power, as purpose. The keeper closed her eyes. The prophecy was misunderstood. She smiled through quiet tears. There was never one heart of winter. There were always. She looked toward Alara. 9 hearts. At that exact moment, the castle nursery doors burst open. Captain Cedric rushed inside with several guards, swords already drawn. The building trembled violently. Windows rattled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Outside, terrified citizens poured into the streets. Then, the trembling stopped. The 8 children sat quietly inside their cribs. Golden light surrounded each of them. No fear touched their tiny faces. Ash entered the nursery without making a sound. The great wolf walked from crib to crib, gently touching each child with his nose. Then he sat in the center of the room, watching, guarding, waiting. Back within the sanctuary, the Hollow King's roar rolled across the mountains. The invisible barrier surrounding the valley rippled. Dark cracks spread across the air itself. The keeper slowly rose. He has found us. Rowan drew his sword. Its polished steel reflected the golden light. I'll hold him. The keeper shook her head. You cannot defeat him with steel. Then tell me how. She looked toward Alara. The same way he was defeated once before. With mercy. The words felt impossible. How could mercy stop a creature born from endless grief? Before anyone could speak again, the barrier shattered. A freezing wind exploded across the sanctuary. The flowers bent beneath its force. The crystal lake churned violently. Dark mist poured into the valley. The Hollow King stepped through it. Every footfall turned green grass into frozen stone. Every breath covered silver leaves with black ice. Behind him came the shadow creatures, crawling silently across the earth like living nightmares. Rowan immediately placed himself between the darkness and Alara. His sword rose. Not with confidence. With determination. The Hollow King looked at him. So. His voice echoed through every tree. Another king chooses battle. Rowan answered calmly.
No.
He lowered his sword. I choose my people. The Hollow King paused. Confusion flickered across his ancient face. Rowan slowly removed his crown. The simple silver circlet that had rested upon his head since his coronation. He laid it upon the frozen ground. I spent years believing a king protects his kingdom through strength. He looked directly into the Hollow King's burning eyes. But strength without compassion creates nothing worth protecting. He stepped away from the crown. If a crown demands innocent lives, I no longer deserve to wear it. Silence spread through the valley. Even the shadow creatures stopped moving. The Hollow King's burning eyes fixed upon the abandoned crown. Something deep inside the ancient guardian stirred. A forgotten memory. A distant voice. A child laughing beneath spring blossoms. A queen placing a crown upon his head centuries ago. Before grief. Before hatred. Before darkness. The cracked armor covering his chest began glowing faintly. At the same time, Alara slowly walked forward. Every instinct told Rowan to stop her. He didn't. Because he saw something in her eyes. Not recklessness.
Love.
She carried the white-haired child toward the Hollow King. The little one reached tiny hands toward the towering guardian. Without fear. Without hesitation. The child smiled. The Hollow King stared silently. Then, very slowly, he knelt. His enormous armored hands trembled. The child placed one tiny palm against the cracked breastplate covering his heart. Golden light spread through every fracture. Not violently. Gently. Like sunrise melting frost from forgotten fields. The Hollow King closed his eyes. For centuries, he had carried only sorrow. Now, he remembered. The villages he once protected. The children he had rescued. The forests he had planted. The promises he had sworn. The darkness feeding upon his grief began breaking apart. Shadow creatures dissolved into drifting snow. The black ice covering his armor cracked and fell away. The ancient guardian looked no older than Rowan. Tired. Broken.
Free.
A single tear rolled down his face. His voice trembled. Remember. The keeper smiled. Welcome home. The guardian bowed his head. Then turned toward the distant mountains. Only one task remained. Inside the ruined temple, Darius desperately clutched the crumbling heartstone. No. The crimson glow faded rapidly. This isn't possible. Cracks raced across the ancient relic. The Hollow King appeared within the temple entrance. No longer wrapped in darkness. Only light. He looked at Darius with deep sadness. Not hatred. You feared losing your kingdom. Darius stepped backward. They would have destroyed everything. You destroyed it yourself. The heartstone shattered. Thousands of crimson fragments scattered across the floor before dissolving into ordinary dust. The unnatural storm vanished instantly. Black clouds broke apart. Sunlight poured across the mountains for the first time in weeks. The Hollow King raised one hand. Every creature born from forbidden magic disappeared like mist beneath morning light. The ruined temple fell silent. Darius collapsed to his knees. The weight of every choice he had made settled upon him all at once. He looked smaller than he ever had, not because his body had changed, because his pride had finally left him. Days later, the people of both kingdoms gathered in the great valley between Frostfang and Ashen Vale. No armies stood facing one another. Only families, farmers, healers, children, hunters. Wolves wandered freely among them without fear. For the first time in living memory, no banners separated the crowd. Rowan stood beside Alara beneath the open sky. He wore no crown. Neither did Darius. The former king faced the people quietly, expecting judgment, perhaps even death. Instead, Alara stepped forward. Many stared at her in disbelief. She had every reason to demand vengeance. She had lost her home, her husband, her place among her own people. She looked into Darius's tired eyes. You took everything from me. He lowered his head. I know. She held the white-haired child in one arm while the other 8 stood nearby, now strong enough to hold one another's hands. My children deserve a world better than the one we inherited. Silence settled over the valley. So do yours. She turned toward the gathered people. Justice is not built from revenge. It is built from choosing not to become what wounded us. No one spoke. Many wept. Darius slowly fell to one knee. Not before a queen. Not before a ruler. Before the woman whose compassion had defeated everything his fear never could. He surrendered his throne without resistance. Not because he had been conquered, because he finally understood. The seasons changed. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The rivers flowed freely. The forests bloomed brighter than anyone could remember. Children from both kingdoms played together without knowing where one border had once ended and another had begun. Rowan accepted the crown again, but not as ruler of Ashen Vale alone. The two kingdoms became one, united not through conquest but through trust. The first law he signed carried no taxes, no punishments, and no military command. It declared that no child, regardless of birth, rank, or bloodline, would ever again be abandoned by the crown. The law became known as the Promise of the 9 Hearts. As for Alara, people offered her titles she never wanted.
Queen, Saint,
Chosen One, Guardian of Winter. She accepted none of them, but one name remained. One spoken by children, travelers, old shepherds, soldiers, and wolves alike. The Mother of the 9 Hearts. Years later, when gray began touching her hair and the 9 children had grown into compassionate guardians of the United Kingdom, people often asked how she had survived the night the storm tried to bury her forever. Alara would simply smile and look toward the ancient mountains, where wolves still howled beneath the moon. Then she would answer with the same quiet truth that had shaped her entire life. The cold is powerful. She would gently take the hand of the nearest child. But kindness is patient. Her eyes would lift toward the first trees standing unseen beyond the mountains. And patience outlives every storm. Far away, beneath silver leaves that never withered, the ancient keeper smiled. The first tree rustled softly in the evening breeze. 9 wolves stood together beneath its branches, their eyes shining with quiet peace. And the mountain, which remembered every promise, finally remembered one that had been kept.